The jungle was alive with enemy movement. 30 Viet Cong soldiers, armed and organized, passed within 20 meters of the hidden observation post. The American LRRP team raised their weapons, fingers hovering over triggers. Just across the valley, an Australian SAS patrol watched the same enemy column through their binoculars and did absolutely nothing. This wasn't cowardice. This was the one secret America failed to copy. Vietnam, 1967. The war was at its peak, and the United States military faced a problem that all its firepower couldn't solve. The enemy was invisible. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army melted into the jungle like smoke, striking without warning and vanishing before American forces could respond. Traditional infantry sweeps were useless. Large units stomping through the jungle announced their presence hours before arrival. The enemy simply disappeared, leaving empty villages and cold campfires. The frustration was maddening. How do you fight an enemy you cannot find? The answer seemed obvious. If large units couldn't locate the enemy, then small elite teams would do it instead. The United States Army created the Long-Range Reconnaissance Patrols, the LRRPs. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were volunteers, hand-picked for mental toughness and tactical excellence. They trained harder than regular infantry, learned advanced fieldcraft, and operated in teams of 4 to 6 men, sometimes staying behind enemy lines for weeks. They traveled light, lived off freeze-dried rations, and communicated in whispers. On paper, they were perfect for the mission. American military planners looked abroad for inspiration. The British Special Air Service had pioneered small unit tactics in World War II. The Rhodesian Sealess Scouts operated deep in hostile territory. But it was the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, the SASR, operating in Vietnam alongside American forces, that became the primary model. The Australians were getting results. Their patrols returned with invaluable intelligence. They seemed to know where the enemy was at all times. American commanders wanted that capability, and they wanted it immediately. So the United States studied the SASR methods. They observed Australian operations, attended briefings, and copied the organizational structure. LRRP teams adopted similar patrol sizes, 4 to 6 men. They used comparable equipment, carried similar weapons, and employed related insertion techniques. Both forces moved through the jungle in single file with the same spacing. Both used hand signals for silent communication. Both relied on stealth rather than firepower. The similarities were striking, and American confidence grew. They had reverse-engineered the Australian success formula. But something was fundamentally different, something invisible that didn't appear in after-action reports or tactical manuals. It wasn't a piece of equipment or a specific technique. It was a philosophy, a mindset so deeply ingrained in SASR culture that the Australians themselves barely recognized it as unique. And this philosophical difference would define the contrasting effectiveness of the two forces. The American military doctrine in Vietnam was built around a concept called search and destroy. The name said everything. Find the enemy and kill him. Success was measured in body count, the number of enemy dead after each engagement. Every briefing, every after-action report, every command meeting focused on that number. How many did you kill? Commanders competed for the highest counts. Careers advanced based on enemy casualties. The entire machine was designed to produce corpses, and everyone from generals to privates understood that simple fact. This doctrine shaped everything the LRRPs did. Yes, their primary mission was reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on enemy movements. But when they found the enemy, the expectation was clear. Fix them in place and destroy them. A LRRP patrol discovering an enemy camp would establish observation, count the soldiers, identify weapons, and then call in fire support. Artillery shells would rain down, or jet fighters would scream overhead, releasing napalm and high explosives. The LRRP team provided the eyes, and the American war machine provided the fist. It was effective, brutal, and completely aligned with American military culture. The Australian approach was fundamentally different, though it took Americans months to realize it. When an SASR patrol found the enemy, their first instinct wasn't to kill. It was to watch. The mission objective wasn't destruction. It was understanding. Where are they going? What are they carrying? How many are in the group? What condition are their weapons in? Do they look well-fed or starving? Are they confident or nervous? Every detail mattered because intelligence, not body count, was the metric of success. This difference might seem subtle, but it created wildly different behaviors in the field. Imagine a scenario that happened dozens of times throughout the war. A small patrol discovers an enemy trail, freshly used, leading deeper into the jungle. The LRRP response was predictable. Set up an ambush. Kill everyone who uses that trail. Call in artillery on the location. Destroy the enemy's ability to move through that area. Mission accomplished, body count achieved, return to base. An SASR patrol finding the same trail would respond completely differently. They wouldn't prepare an ambush. Instead, they would establish a covert observation post, hidden so perfectly that soldiers could walk within meters without detection. Then they would watch. For days, sometimes weeks. They would document every person who used that trail, noting times, directions, equipment, and unit insignia. They would track patterns. Morning traffic heading north with full packs. Evening traffic heading south with empty ones. That indicated a supply route, which meant somewhere north was a base or cache site worth much more than a few dead soldiers on a trail. The SASR had mastered something psychologically difficult. The discipline to see the enemy and deliberately choose not to shoot. This wasn't passivity or cowardice. It was strategic patience. Killing 5 soldiers on a trail was easy. Following those 5 soldiers to their battalion headquarters, documenting the entire base layout, identifying the command structure, and then calling in a massive airstrike that destroyed the entire operation was infinitely more valuable. But it required watching the enemy walk past, possibly for days, resisting the urge for immediate action. This patience created situations that seemed insane to American observers. There are documented accounts of SASR patrols observing Viet Cong camps from concealed positions for over a week. They watched enemy soldiers eat, sleep, clean weapons, and go about daily routines, all while remaining completely undetected just hundreds of meters away. They were so close they could hear conversations. They documented guard rotations, identified commanders, mapped the camp layout, and counted ammunition crates. Only after gathering complete intelligence did they extract and report, often recommending strikes days later when the intelligence was fully analyzed. American LRRPs operated under different pressures. If they spotted an enemy camp and didn't engage, questions arose. Why didn't you attack? Why didn't you call fire support? The institutional culture demanded action. Results meant dead enemies, not intelligence reports. A LRRP team returning with detailed notes about an enemy camp but no body count would face skepticism. What were you doing out there? The system rewarded aggression, not patience. This cultural difference extended to how contact with the enemy was handled. Contact, in military terminology, means encountering hostile forces. For LRRP teams, contact was often part of the plan. They inserted into areas specifically to find the enemy, engage them, and either destroy them directly or call in support. Contact meant the mission was working. The enemy had been found, and now he would be eliminated. LRRP teams were trained to be aggressive in contact, returning fire immediately and maneuvering to gain advantage. For the SASR, contact was considered a failure. If the enemy knew you were there, you had already lost. The perfect SASR mission was one where the patrol gathered intelligence and extracted without the enemy ever knowing they had been observed. Being detected meant compromising the intelligence value of everything they had seen. It meant burning the observation site for future use. It meant the enemy would change patterns and relocate. Contact wasn't victory. It was mission failure, something to avoid at almost any cost. This led to different tactical behaviors. LRRP teams moved with confidence bordering on aggression. They were small but lethal, willing to engage enemy forces several times their size because they had massive fire support backing them. Radio operators could call down artillery strikes within minutes. Helicopter gunships could arrive in under 20 minutes. Fighter bombers were always on station. The LRRP team was the tip of an enormous spear, and they operated knowing that spear was always ready to strike. SASR patrols moved like ghosts. Every step was calculated to leave no trace. They avoided trails entirely, moving through the thickest jungle where movement was exhausting but detection was nearly impossible. They practiced counter-tracking, techniques to disguise their path from enemy trackers. They would wade through streams to break scent trails for tracker dogs. They carried out their waste to avoid leaving any sign of their presence. An SASR patrol passing through an area left nothing behind. No footprints, no broken branches, no cigarette butts, nothing. They were invisible. The radio discipline was equally different. LRRP teams maintained regular radio contact with base, checking in multiple times per day. This was practical because they might need fire support at any moment, and commanders wanted constant updates. The radio was their lifeline, the connection to all that American firepower waiting to be unleashed. SASR patrols maintained strict radio silence unless absolutely necessary. Every transmission was a risk, a signal that could be intercepted and triangulated. They would go days without transmitting, only breaking silence to report critical intelligence or request emergency extraction. The radio was a last resort, not a lifeline. Their security came from being unknown, not from having fire support on call. These philosophical differences created a strange dynamic between the two forces. American commanders respected the SASR effectiveness but didn't truly understand it. They saw Australian patrols bringing back excellent intelligence but missed the disciplined patience that produced it. They tried to replicate the tactics without adopting the underlying philosophy. It was like copying the moves of a master martial artist without understanding the principles behind them. The form was similar, but the substance was missing. There's a specific incident that illustrates this perfectly, though details remain partially classified. In late 1968, an American LRRP team and an Australian SASR patrol were operating in the same general area of Phu Oc province. Neither knew the other was there. Standard operational security. Both teams were tracking the same North Vietnamese Army unit, a battalion-sized force moving supplies south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail network. The LRRP team found the enemy first. They established observation on a trail junction and watched approximately 40 NVA soldiers pass through, carrying heavy packs. The team leader made the tactically sound decision to call in artillery. Within 15 minutes, American howitzers were pounding the area. The bombardment killed an estimated 20 enemy soldiers and scattered the rest. The LRRP team reported mission success, body count 20, enemy battalion disrupted. They extracted the next day to well-deserved recognition. 3 kilometers away, the SASR patrol heard the artillery barrage and knew immediately what it meant. Another unit had found the enemy and engaged. The Australians had been tracking the same NVA battalion for 6 days. They hadn't engaged because they were waiting for the enemy to lead them to their destination. Intelligence suggested a major supply cache somewhere in the area, possibly containing anti-aircraft weapons that were causing significant problems for American helicopters. The SASR patrol had been following the supply carriers, believing they would eventually reach the cache site. The artillery strike ended that possibility. The NVA battalion scattered into the jungle and went to ground. The supply cache, wherever it was, remained hidden. The SASR patrol leader filed a terse after-action report, noting that the mission was compromised by friendly fire support in their operational area. There was no blame, no anger, just recognition that two different philosophies had collided with predictable results. The American approach had achieved immediate tactical success. 20 dead enemy soldiers, 1 battalion disrupted. The LRRP team had done exactly what they were trained to do, find the enemy and destroy him. By every metric the American military used, this was a successful mission, but the strategic opportunity was lost. The supply cache remained hidden and continued feeding enemy operations for months. The anti-aircraft weapons kept shooting down American helicopters. The immediate tactical victory prevented a much larger strategic success. This pattern repeated throughout the war. American forces were incredibly effective at killing enemy soldiers, but struggled to destroy the enemy's capacity to fight. Every time a trail was ambushed, the Viet Cong built another trail. Every time a camp was destroyed, they built another camp. The body count kept rising, but the enemy kept coming. The tactical victories weren't translating into strategic success because the approach was fundamentally reactive, responding to enemy presence rather than understanding enemy systems. The SASR approach was slower but more systemic. They didn't just want to kill soldiers. They wanted to understand how the enemy operated and then destroy those operational systems. Find the supply routes and you can target the supply caches. Find the communication patterns and you can identify command centers. Find the training areas and you can disrupt the enemy's ability to create new units. This required patience, detailed observation, and the discipline to prioritize information over immediate action. There's another crucial difference that affected effectiveness: how intelligence was processed and used. When LRRP teams returned from missions, they were debriefed quickly, usually within hours. The intelligence they gathered was immediately analyzed and often acted upon within days. This rapid cycle was efficient, but limited depth. The focus was on immediate tactical intelligence. Where is the enemy right now, and how can we hit him? SAS intelligence went through a more thorough process. Patrol reports were combined with previous observations, aerial photography, signals intelligence, and interrogation reports to build comprehensive pictures of enemy operations. A single SASR patrol might observe a trail for a week, documenting hundreds of individual enemy movements. That data would be combined with other patrol observations from different locations, revealing the entire network of trails, camps, and supply routes. This took time but produced intelligence of far greater strategic value. The Australian approach required institutional support that prioritized intelligence analysis over immediate action. The SASR had dedicated intelligence officers who did nothing but analyze patrol reports and build these comprehensive pictures. They maintained detailed maps showing every trail, every campsite, every water source, and every enemy movement pattern. Over time, these maps became incredibly accurate, allowing them to predict enemy movements and identify vulnerable points in enemy logistics. The American system, focused on body count and immediate results, didn't invest as heavily in this kind of deep analysis. Intelligence was important, but killing the enemy was the priority. LRRP reports were valuable for planning the next search and destroy mission, but weren't systematically analyzed to understand larger enemy operational patterns. The information was used tactically, not strategically. Training reflected these different priorities. LRRP training was intense, focusing on physical toughness, weapons proficiency, and tactical skills. Candidates learned patrolling techniques, immediate action drills, and how to call in fire support. The training was excellent, producing highly capable soldiers ready for combat operations behind enemy lines. But the emphasis was on combat effectiveness, being able to fight and win when encountering the enemy. SASR training included all those combat skills, but added extensive emphasis on fieldcraft and observation. Candidates spent weeks learning tracking and counter-tracking. They practiced observation techniques, learning to remain motionless for hours while memorizing every detail of a target area. They studied enemy uniforms, weapons, and equipment to extract maximum intelligence from brief sightings. They learned patience as a tactical skill, how to control the urge for immediate action in favor of strategic gain. One SASR training exercise became legendary. Candidates would be placed in a hide site, a carefully concealed observation position overlooking a trail. Instructors would walk past, sometimes within meters, carrying obvious weapons or equipment. The candidate's job was to remain undetected while documenting everything they saw. But here's the key part. Instructors would deliberately create opportunities for candidates to compromise their position. They might drop something valuable nearby, or appear to be struggling and vulnerable, or make themselves easy targets. Candidates who broke cover to help, to take the opportunity, or simply because they lost patience, failed the exercise. The lesson was clear. Mission discipline above all else. American training had no equivalent exercise because the underlying philosophy was different. Taking opportunities to engage the enemy was encouraged, not discouraged. Aggression was a virtue. A LRRP team that passed up an easy target would be questioned, not praised. The systems were training soldiers for fundamentally different missions, even though the mission descriptions sounded identical on paper. These differences extended to equipment choices in subtle ways. Both forces carried similar basic equipment: rifles, radios, and survival gear. But the details revealed different priorities. LRRP teams typically carried more ammunition, expecting potential combat. They brought claymore mines for hasty ambushes and colored smoke grenades for marking landing zones. Their loadout was designed for fighting. SASR patrols carried less ammunition but more observation equipment. Binoculars were high-quality optics, not cheap military issue. They brought cameras with telephoto lenses to document enemy installations. They carried detailed notebooks and pencils to record observations. Their loadout was designed for watching, with fighting capability as a backup. Even weapon selection reflected philosophy. Many LRRP teams preferred the heavier firepower of the M16 rifle or even cut-down M60 machine guns. More bullets meant more capability in a firefight. SASR patrols often used suppressed weapons not because they planned to shoot people quietly, but because if they had to shoot at all, they wanted to minimize the noise signature that would alert other enemy forces in the area. The vegetation itself played a role in these tactical differences. The Vietnamese jungle was incredibly dense in most areas. Visibility limited to meters. Movement was exhausting, cutting through vines and thorns while trying to remain quiet. Both forces dealt with the same brutal environment, but their approaches diverged. LRRP teams accepted that some noise was unavoidable and relied on speed and firepower if detected. SASR patrols moved slower, sometimes covering less than a kilometer per day, but moved almost silently through terrain that seemed impossible to traverse quietly. This speed difference created operational tempo differences. LRRP missions typically lasted 1 to 2 weeks. Teams would insert, patrol their assigned area, gather intelligence, engage targets of opportunity, and extract. Multiple missions could be conducted in the same area over months, building up knowledge through repeated operations. CSR missions could last 3 to 4 weeks or even longer. A single patrol might spend that entire time tracking one enemy unit or observing one section of trail network. The investment of time per mission was enormous, but the intelligence gathered was proportionally valuable. They didn't need repeated missions in the same area because the first mission was so thorough. Extraction methods also revealed philosophical differences. LRRP teams often extracted by helicopter from hastily cleared landing zones. The extraction might be under fire, a hot LZ in military terminology, with gunships providing suppressive fire while the transport helicopter grabbed the team. It was dangerous but fast and supported the aggressive operational tempo. SASR teams preferred cold extractions from secure areas. They would move to a predetermined extraction point, establish security, and wait for pickup at a scheduled time. If the area was compromised, they would abort and move to an alternate extraction point rather than risk a hot extraction. They would rather walk for days to a secure pickup than compromise their stealth with a noisy, risky helicopter rescue. There were occasions when LRRP teams and SASR patrols worked together or shared operational areas. These interactions were professional but sometimes revealed the cultural gaps. American soldiers were often impressed by Australian fieldcraft but found their reluctance to engage frustrating. Why watch the enemy when you can kill him? The Australian patience seemed almost passive. Australian soldiers respected American courage and firepower but considered their approach reckless. Calling in artillery on every enemy sighting seemed wasteful, burning intelligence opportunities for immediate gratification. The American aggression seemed almost undisciplined. Neither side was wrong. They were optimized for different measures of success within different strategic frameworks. The American military in Vietnam was under enormous political pressure to show results, to prove the war was being won. Body count provided quantifiable, reportable results. Commanders could point to numbers and demonstrate progress. Intelligence gathering was valuable, but didn't provide the same political optics. The Australian commitment to Vietnam was smaller, only a few thousand troops compared to hundreds of thousands of Americans. They weren't under the same political pressure to produce dramatic results. Their government wanted valuable intelligence to support Allied operations and to minimize Australian casualties. The SASR approach delivered both. They provided excellent intelligence and, because they avoided contact, suffered relatively few casualties despite operating in extremely dangerous areas. Casualty rates tell an interesting story. LRRP teams took significant casualties throughout the war. Operating in small numbers behind enemy lines was inherently dangerous, and their aggressive posture meant they often found themselves in serious firefights. Many LRRP soldiers were killed or wounded, and entire teams were occasionally lost. The casualty rate was accepted as part of the mission, the price of aggressive reconnaissance. SASR patrols suffered far fewer casualties despite operating in equally dangerous areas for longer periods. Their emphasis on stealth and avoiding contact kept them safe. When they did encounter the enemy, their training and discipline usually allowed them to disengage without significant losses. The few Australian Special Forces soldiers killed in Vietnam died primarily in accidents or during extractions, not in direct combat engagements. Some American commanders recognized these patterns and tried to shift LRRP tactics toward the Australian model. There were directives emphasizing intelligence gathering over immediate engagement. Some teams were ordered to avoid contact unless absolutely necessary and to prioritize observation. But these directives conflicted with the broader military culture that still measured success in body count. LRRP teams received mixed messages. Be like the Australians, but also deliver the high body counts we're reporting to Washington. This institutional confusion created frustration. LRRP teams were capable of operating like SASR patrols. The individual skills were there. But the system didn't fully support that approach. Intelligence gathered through patient observation didn't generate the same recognition as successful combat actions. Promotions and medals came from heroism in firefights, not from sitting quietly in a hide site for 2 weeks. The incentive structure pushed toward action even when patience would have been more valuable. There's a deeper psychological element here too, cultural attitudes toward warfare itself. American military culture valued decisive action and individual heroism. The ideal soldier was aggressive, brave, and willing to close with the enemy. These values produced incredible fighters, soldiers who would charge machine gun nests or hold impossible positions against overwhelming odds. But those same values made the passive discipline of long-term observation feel wrong, almost cowardly. Australian military culture, influenced by British traditions and smaller force structures, valued cunning and efficiency more than heroic charges. The ideal SASR soldier was patient, clever, and professional. Glory came from completing difficult missions successfully, not from dramatic last stands. These values produced soldiers who could watch the enemy for weeks without firing a shot and feel professional pride in that discipline. Neither culture was superior in absolute terms. They produced different kinds of soldiers, optimized for different missions. But in the context of Vietnam, where the enemy was elusive and the strategic goal was disrupting enemy operations rather than holding territory, the Australian approach proved more effective per soldier deployed. A single SASR patrol could provide intelligence that led to the destruction of enemy infrastructure worth far more than any single firefight could achieve. The tragedy was that American military leadership recognized the SASR effectiveness but couldn't fully replicate it because doing so would require changing the entire institutional culture. You can't copy tactics without copying the philosophy behind them. You can't train soldiers to be patient observers and then reward them for aggressive combat. You can't build an intelligence-focused reconnaissance force while simultaneously demanding high body counts. The system contradicted itself. By the early 1970s, some American Special Operations units were beginning to internalize these lessons. The Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, known as MACV-SOG, operated with more emphasis on intelligence and less on immediate body count. Their missions into Laos and Cambodia prioritized observation of the Ho Chi Minh Trail network over direct engagement. They were moving toward the Australian model, but the war ended before these doctrinal changes could fully take effect. After Vietnam, American Special Operations Forces underwent massive reforms. The failures and lessons of Vietnam were analyzed exhaustively. The creation of Delta Force, the modernization of Army Special Forces, and the evolution of SEAL teams all incorporated lessons learned from Vietnam. Interestingly, many of these reforms moved American Special Operations closer to the SASR philosophy. Modern American Special Operations Forces emphasize intelligence gathering, cultural understanding, and surgical precision over body count and massive firepower. Today's American Special Operators train extensively in observation and intelligence gathering. They learn patience as a tactical virtue. They understand that killing the enemy is sometimes less valuable than watching him to understand larger networks. The cultural shift happened, but it took decades and occurred after Vietnam had already demonstrated the cost of not understanding these principles. The SASR continued to refine their approach through subsequent conflicts. In Afghanistan and Iraq, Australian Special Forces earned reputations as some of the most effective operators in theater. Their emphasis on cultural understanding, patient intelligence gathering, and surgical operations proved incredibly valuable in counterinsurgency environments. Other nations, including the United States, studied Australian operations and incorporated lessons into their own doctrines. The irony is that America originally tried to copy Australia in Vietnam, but missed the most important part. They copied the structure, but not the soul. They replicated the tactics, but not the philosophy. They trained soldiers to do what the SASR did, but rewarded them for doing the opposite. The secret wasn't secret at all. The Australians would have gladly explained it, and probably did in numerous briefings and exchanges. The problem was that the explanation contradicted the fundamental assumptions of American military doctrine at the time. The real lesson isn't about tactics or equipment or training methods. It's about institutional culture and how it shapes behavior. No matter how good your tactics are, soldiers will do what the system rewards them for doing. If the system rewards body count, soldiers will prioritize killing. If the system rewards intelligence, soldiers will prioritize observation. You cannot successfully implement tactics that contradict your incentive structure. The Vietnam War taught many painful lessons. The difference between LRRP and SASR operations is just one example, but it's illustrative of larger problems. American forces were brave, well-equipped, and tactically proficient. They won virtually every battle. But they struggled to translate tactical victories into strategic success because the metrics of success were misaligned with the strategic goals. Killing enemy soldiers didn't end the war because the enemy's ability to continue fighting depended on logistics, infrastructure, and political will, things that patient intelligence gathering could target, but body count could not. 50 years later, these lessons remain relevant. Modern militaries still struggle with the balance between immediate action and strategic patience. The pressure to show results, to demonstrate progress, to justify operations with quantifiable metrics, all these pressures push toward action over observation. The discipline to watch the enemy and deliberately not shoot, to prioritize information over immediate victory, remains psychologically difficult and institutionally challenging. The SASR understood something profound about modern warfare. In conflicts where the enemy is embedded in the population or the terrain, where they can replace losses faster than you can inflict them, destroying individual soldiers is less important than destroying their system. You must understand how they operate, where they get supplies, how they communicate, who leads them, how they recruit and train. That understanding comes from patient observation, from being invisible ghosts who see everything and reveal nothing. America tried to copy that approach in Vietnam, but couldn't fully commit to it because the institutional culture pulled in a different direction. The LRRPs were brave and capable soldiers who could have operated like the SASR if the system had fully supported that mission. But they were asked to be reconnaissance specialists while being measured like infantry, to gather intelligence while producing body counts, to operate like ghosts while being rewarded for fighting. The contradiction was inevitable, and so was the outcome. The one secret America missed wasn't a secret technique or piece of equipment. It was the philosophical discipline to see the enemy and choose understanding over immediate violence. It was the institutional commitment to value intelligence more than body count, to reward patience more than aggression, to measure success in strategic impact rather than tactical victories. That discipline was the foundation of SASR effectiveness, and without it, copying their tactics was like building a house by only copying the visible parts while ignoring the foundation. It might look similar from the outside, but it wouldn't stand the same test. Vietnam ended decades ago, but militaries around the world still study its lessons. The contrast between LRRP and SASR operations remains a case study in how institutional culture shapes tactical effectiveness. It's a reminder that the most important equipment soldiers carry isn't visible. It's the philosophy they operate under, the values they've internalized, and the behaviors their system rewards. Get those wrong, and all the training and equipment in the world won't produce the results you need. The Australian SAS proved that small teams of disciplined, patient soldiers could have strategic impact far beyond their numbers. They became ghosts in the jungle, seeing everything while remaining invisible. The Americans tried to copy them, but built the copy on a different foundation. Both forces were professional, brave, and capable. But one had internalized the patience to watch, and the other was built to fight. In the jungles of Vietnam, that difference mattered more than any tactical manual could capture. If you found this story fascinating, subscribe to our channel for more untold military history. Hit the like button and drop a comment sharing what surprised you most about these different approaches to warfare. What other Vietnam War stories should we cover next?